forgot, you may be getting Bridge's email and not be a member, and we would encourage you to become a member and support the work that we're doing. So enough of that. If you're not a member and you sign up on the email list, I'll be happy to send you some information about the group so that you can see more about what we are doing. This is our last meeting of this sort where we have a speaker, but we do have in June our year-end picnic, and we've set the date for that, Friday, June 16th at 5 p.m. at Chambers Grove Park, and we will get more information out to you. But that's typically a nice opportunity to socialize, see the river, see the park. The chapter will provide grills and grillables, some brats and burgers, and even some meatless options. You bring yourself, bring a dish to share, but please join us for that event. The other thing that we do at that meeting is we have what passes for an annual meeting for us, where we talk about our work for the year, some of the things coming up, and elect new board members. We are looking for a couple of new board members, and so if you're interested in being more involved with us, with the organization, we need your time and talents. So please talk to any of the board members or send me an email, even if you just like to ask questions about what's involved and what the commitment is. Couple of more issue-related announcements. So there's still time to submit a comment to the Minnesota DNR about the milepost 7 expansion for taconite tailings up the shore up above the Beaver River. Rich has, in his wonderful email, has sent out links to how to do that. Comments are still being accepted, or you can submit them until 4:30 tomorrow. So please, if you haven't done that, that's an issue that you're concerned about, tap into that link and submit a comment. We live up in this area, and this is an issue that's definitely going to affect our region. And then the legislature is wrapping up, and some good things seem to be happening. The lead service line replacement bill passed, and significant funding and portion of that work is going to happen in Duluth. We also have had several other priorities that we've worked on during the year: funding for elk reintroduction, some action on chronic wasting disease rolled into the omnibus bill, which I was texting with Craig Sturley, our conservation director, before the meeting, and he told me that bill did pass. He doesn't know what's in it yet. I don't know if the governor has signed it yet, but we are seeing movement on some of the issues that we've worked on, and we'll definitely report out to you at the annual meeting on some of those activities. Couple of upcoming events that you may be interested in. Saturday, June 3rd. For those of you who were at the last meeting where Kathy Wood from Wild Ones was here and she talked about the Monarch Festival, we will be tabling at the Monarch Festival, which is at First United Methodist Church, on that Saturday. So Rich and I and Gail Billland, and if you'd like to join us, let me know. We'll be happy to fit you in, and otherwise it's a good event. So good place to stop up, get some native plants. And then another meeting we wanted to make sure people know about, again, in Rich's newsletter, the St. Louis River Watershed Mercury TMDL process is having the second of a series of public forums coming up. This is going to be on Tuesday, June 6th in the evening from 6 to 8:30 p.m. So should work for people that aren't available to go on the workday as well. And if you're interested in that issue, another one really important for our region, check out that information, and we encourage you to go. Okay, I think that's all my announcements. Rich is there.
Don't forget the lead-free tackle.
Yeah, the lead-free tackle in the back of the room. So we've been participating in a program where the MPCA provides lead-free tackle, and people can swap it out their old tackle. You don't have to swap out any tackle, but Rich brought the box with him. So if you'd like to pick up some lead-free tackle, it's in the back of the room, and please do so. before you go.
There's plenty there, so feel free to take 2 or 3 packages.
He says there's plenty there. I'm sure we'll be giving that out at the Monarch Festival and the annual meeting, so help supply some other fisher folk. All right, well then, our presentation tonight, which is very seasonally appropriate, is on the Lake Superior Coast of Brook Trout. So when the board was putting the program schedule together, and we do put a fair amount of time and effort into thinking about different good topics for times of the year, like, you know, salt in February, and we thought, oh, May, fishing, everybody will want to hear about fishing, that'll be a good topic. Well, what we didn't think about is how busy the resource management professionals are who work on these issues, and it's an incredibly busy time of year for them. So we really appreciate, and I want to thank the 3 of you for making time to be with us tonight to talk about this issue. So we do have 3 individuals tonight. We're going to have presentations by Seth and Cory Goldsworthy, and then Nick Peterson is with us as well. So Seth is joining us online from Grand Portage. Seth Moore is Director of Biology and Environment for the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, where his focus is projects designed to accomplish natural resource and environmental goals of the Grand Portage Band. He's spent his entire career working on Great Lakes fisheries, wildlife, and environmental issues, and his work has been recognized with several awards, including the 2018 Conservation Award winner by the North American Fur Association and the 2013 Tribal Biologist of the Year Award from Native American Fish and Wildlife Society. He also serves as a citizen member of the Legislative Commission on Minnesota Resources. So he'll be doing his presentation over Zoom, followed by Cory Goldsworthy, who's here in the room with us. Cory is a native of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where he grew up chasing brook trout, reading Robert Travers books, and living a feral outdoors lifestyle as a kid. His love for brook trout at an early age propelled him into fisheries management, and he spent the last 17 years with the Minnesota DNR, and the last 9 years as the Lake Superior area supervisor here in Duluth. And then also with us here in the room is Nick Peterson, migratory fish specialist for the Minnesota DNR. Nick's work is focused on streams and stream habitat, with primary responsibilities around the management of coastal brook trout, steelhead of various types. He leads a number of field activities, including knife and French River trapping operations, egg taking and stocking programs for rainbow creel surveys, and stream electrofishing. Nick in particular has a number of research projects that use volunteer anglers for data collection, and you may have seen the article that John Myers had in the newspaper earlier this year about his work and the need to engage those of us who fish in that. So I'm sure we'll hear a little bit about that tonight. So we're gonna, I want to thank you all. Huge amount of expertise. I know this is going to be a great presentation, and we'll let Seth get started with his presentation.
Hi everybody. I'm really happy to be here. You guys are fortunate to be graced with the presence of the 2 most handsome bald fisheries biologists in the Great Lakes Basin. And there are several qualifiers there. And today I'll talk about coastal brook trout, some of their habitat preferences, and then some of the work that's being done in my work with the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, and then we'll transition over to Cory and Nick from the Minnesota DNR, and they'll chat about some of the work that they're doing as well. On this presentation, I stole from my former biologist Izaak, who is arguably one of the best fish and wildlife biologists in the Great Lakes, and The Minnesota DNR recently has stolen him from me, for which I'll never forgive either EJ or the DNR. I'll start by introducing the species itself. Brook trout is, species name is Salvelinus fontanalis, has several different life history strategies, as most of you are probably aware, has stream resident phase and can be called speckled trout, brook trout, or brook char. It has an anadromous phase, which you may not be familiar with, but there are actually sea-run brook trout that migrate into the Atlantic Ocean on the east coast of Canada and get even larger than coastal brook trout do here. There are lake resident brook trout, and then there are this patadromous form, which is the form that moves between freshwater lakes and tributaries, which is what we call coastal brook trout here in the Great Lakes. Some background, historically, coastal brook trout occupied Lake Superior nearly ubiquitously. They were historically abundant, but are unfortunately very easy to catch using angling methods. They can be large in size and are relatively easily caught. Their populations were decimated probably in the mid to late 1800s. They became a very popular species for tourists, and people would just take large numbers of them because they were easy to harvest. And there are only a handful of spawning stocks that currently exist, although I think Cory and I both will talk about some successes in restoring coastal brook trout. And in the early 2000s, the Great Lakes Fisheries Commission published a rehabilitation plan that I think we are intending to revise in the next year, a couple of years. Historically, coastal brook trout occupied all of the tributaries indicated by red circles on this map of Lake Superior. They were found around the basin, but through the habitat loss in the 1800s and the fisheries population decline, they just are not nearly as prevalent. And there are three general locations where native populations still exist, which is on the Keweenaw Peninsula, Royal National Park, and up in the Nipigon Bay area. Oh, and we have some in Grand Portage, but I'm not convinced that those are historic populations. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about the work that I did for my dissertation in the late 90s and early 2000s. This is one of the most difficult decades of my entire life, but of all the decades that I've spent, I don't think there have been any particularly easy ones. But what I studied in my dissertation work was how landscapes and habitats can be used to predict coastal brook trout streams with an intent that we could perhaps restore habitats in areas where they're degraded to try to restore the fish species. And then I also, I hypothesized that large-scale landscape characteristics are related to the habitat characteristics that are most important to coastal brook trout. I studied, I think it was somewhere around 33 streams, starting from the South Shore Ashland area in Wisconsin and working up to the Nipigon Bay area. And on each of these streams, I collected a suite of somewhere around 30 or 40 habitat variables, and then eventually built a predictive model to predict brook trout presence or absence. So what we found was at a landscape scale, brook trout tend to do well in coniferous areas, lots of conifer and pine, well-drained soils with relatively steep slope. And from a habitat perspective, there were two variables that really stood out to predict the presence of brook trout, which was large woody debris in the streams and low conductivity, which indicates high water quality. So as you guys as a group advocate for different species, and in particular native species, these are really the factors you need to be advocating for, which is essentially lack of development. So we'll just skip right to 9 years later and my PhD defense. These watershed scale variables were better predictors than habitat. High proportion of conifer, well-drained soils, low slopes, and low road densities were good broad scale predictors. And then, like I said, low conductivity, high water quality, and shallow depths with large woody debris were the best habitat scale variables. So as people think about stream restoration to benefit brook trout, large woody debris would be very helpful. But the key here is that, you know, maintaining wilderness is important for brook trout and other native species in this basin. Development and logging practices can and have impeded brook trout restoration, and we need to make sure that we implement buffer strips in riparian areas to prevent siltation and reduce salt loading as well. So our management implications, yeah, we need to minimize impacts of development, avoid adding new road crossings to the extent possible. And then one thing I'd like you folks as anglers to think about, and these are conversations I've had with the DNR and others, is if the present day streams are at the carrying capacity for all species of trout, then we should be paying attention to the potential for direct competition among the trout species, which in the instance of the North Shore would be brook trout competing with steelhead and rainbow trout that have been introduced. My focus here working for the reservation is always native species restoration first and foremost. And so we actually consider steelhead on the reservation to be an invasive species, which would cause consternation with some advocacy groups that focus on all species of trout rather than specifically on native species of trout. I'll transition now to some work that we've been doing on the Grand Portage Reservation. We've been restoring coastal brook trout for about 50 years here on the reservation, which is almost as long as I've been on this earth. But we really have increased our efforts in about the last 30 years or so. We've been stocking brook trout, like I said, for about 50 years. We built a native fish hatchery in around 2007. It was my Christmas gift to the tribe, but I spent 2 years designing the thing and having it constructed, and I handed it over on Christmas Eve of 2007 to the tribal chair. I thought that was funny at the time. And in addition to producing brook trout through our native fish hatchery, we conduct annual surveys in our streams and in Lake Superior as well. Here's an image of us stocking some fish from the federal fish hatcheries. Sometimes we just pump them right out of the truck into some of our tributary streams. And then here's an image of our fish hatchery. We typically acquire eggs from Iron River National Fish Hatchery and then rear them in heath trays in our hatchery. And then we've developed a recirculating system so that we can get higher growth rates from slightly warmer water temperatures as well. Then we stock them and then we survey the different streams for them. So the goal of the Grand Portage Native Fish Hatchery is obviously to enhance native fish stocks and native fish species. So we primarily focus on coastal brook trout in our hatchery, but we also rear some walleye from egg to larval to even fingerling stage. We've dabbled in Lake Cisco and in Lake Whitefish as well. And we have intentions at some point of trying to rear lake sturgeon also. We've tried many different approaches at stocking. This is an image of our snowmobile groomer, our snowmobile trail groomer with a fish stocking box, stocking one of our systems shortly after hatch of brook trout, because we wondered if hatching larval brook trout may be more effective than rearing them in the hatchery under a hatchery environment that selects for fish specifically that would do well in hatcheries, but not necessarily in the wild. Our survey objectives, we try to determine brook trout abundances in our streams and in Lake Superior as well. One of our practices, we employ nighttime electrofishing in Lake Superior. We survey the entire Grand Portage shoreline the entire Grand Portage Lake Superior shoreline, which is about, I want to say 35 kilometers of shoreline or 17 miles. And we do this on an annual basis. And then we've begun recently expanding our survey work in partnership with Cory and the DNR down the shore further towards Grand Marais and including the Grand Marais Marina. Our shoreline's relatively rugged, like most of the North Shore. What we've been seeing in terms of range expansion is very promising, in my opinion. And in the early years of our work, we only found brook trout in about 9% of the available shoreline of the Grand Portage Reservation. By 2012, that had expanded to about 30% of the shoreline, and by 2014, we were close to half of the Grand Portage shoreline is occupied by coastal brook trout. And then we can look at densities along the shoreline as well. And the darker colors indicate the higher abundances of brook trout as captured in our electrofishing surveys. So, Pigeon Bay, that's a very dense area, relatively dense area for large brook trout. There's another dense area in Grand Portage Bay as well, and then lower densities down the shoreline. Our brook trout abundance over time from our electrofishing has increased significantly, but this graph isn't quite as rosy as it appears. The red bars are fin-clipped fish, which are fish that have been stocked in some form by our agency, and the black bars are unclipped fish, which are fish that were either stocked at a very small size before we could clip their fins to mark them, or they are naturally reproduced fish. So I'm not convinced we're seeing strong natural reproduction of coastal brook trout in Grand Portage. I think our populations are primarily subsidized by stocking. I think Cory will tell hopefully a little bit of a different tale for some of the streams down the shore where they haven't stocked as aggressively, but they appear to be seeing some good production of brook trout from naturally produced sources, which is pretty cool. Of concern to me as a native fish restoration biologist is we've been seeing increasing abundances of steelhead in Grand Portage waters. And I actually think this year, I hope some folks are out fishing. This year appears to be a boom year for steelhead in the streams, at least up by us. I'm not sure if you guys are seeing this down the shore as well. But rainbow trout may or may not compete with brook trout in Lake Superior proper. But I do think there is high potential for competition in the streams where both species are rearing as juveniles. And that's where I would get concerned about high populations of steelhead spawning in these streams, because those larval and juvenile steelhead are simply outcompeting any brook trout that exist. And we've discussed this frequently with the other agencies that are stocking non-native salmonids. So our conclusions from the Grand Portage work, we have reasonable populations and good range expansion of coastal brook trout. I have some concerns that most of the fish that we're seeing are hatchery origin, and we're just not seeing good natural reproduction. We have definitely seen a diffusion from high density areas to low density areas, which is good logic, but it's also good to see that that's happening. And we are concerned about high populations of steelhead through restoration efforts that have been long lasting, but I do think that may impede coastal brook trout restoration if we continue to see the high populations of non-native salmonids. Where should we go? I think in Grand Portage, we need to maybe reevaluate our stocking practices and consider if we pull the plug on stocking, could these fish start natural reproduction perhaps a bit more effectively? We should probably determine the carrying capacity of some of our habitats and really see what level of competition is going on between the different trout species. And that's all I have. I'm happy to answer some questions now or wait till Cory and Nick are done and collectively answer some questions afterwards. So however you guys want to do that is totally fine with me. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Seth, do you want to, what do you think? You want to do your?
If anybody has Grand Portage specific questions, Seth could field those now, that'd be fine.
Sounds good.
specific questions? Glenn?
So, Seth, Glenn Merrick, what has convinced you that the fish are, stream spawning as opposed to reef spawning? I think about experience on Lake Nipigon, knowing that those are reef spawning fish, and I know that there's reef spawning populations in some of the Canadian bays. And I just wonder about the habitat availability for reef spawning fish and the lack of large streams with a lot of potential.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, to be most direct in response, I'm actually not really convinced there's much, if any, natural reproduction going on in Grand Portage at all. That said, there definitely is potential for shoal spawning and lake spawning brook trout. The strain of brook trout that we have been stocking for the last 30 years or so are Tobin Harbor strain from Isle Royal, and those are actually purported to be a shoal spawning strain. So that potential definitely exists, and I think there's some recent conversations at the Lake Superior Technical Committee level and also the Lake Superior Committee level about potentially switching from that strain to a more specific stream spawning strain, because that may actually work better for some of our tributaries. But also your point is good that our tributaries along the North Shore are not optimal spawning or rearing habitat for brook trout. There's generally a very short distance to the barrier, which means a short amount of available habitat for rearing fish. You know, some of these streams are 100 yards till you get to a waterfall. A couple of them maybe half a mile, but for the most part, there are significant fish passage barriers on most of the North Shore streams.
Thank you.
Dave?
Dr. Moore, Dave Zettner, you talk about the abundance of the fish originally and relatively suppressed stocks now, vulnerability to fishing pressure of all types. So what's a major suppression that we face now in the 21st century?
That's a really good question. I think there could be a few things at play. You know, one of which is historically brook trout were the only trout to occupy any of the streams in the Lake Superior Basin. Now they are challenged by coho salmon, Chinook salmon, brown trout, rainbow trout, pink salmon. So I definitely think there is other trout species competition that could be challenging them. Additionally, I think there are some major habitat challenges. The habitat degradation that occurred to our streams in the Lake Superior Basin during the logging era may not be reversible habitat degradation. And so many streams that historically held brook trout may never again hold brook trout without massive landscape scale habitat restoration. Did that help to answer your question?
Very helpful. And then we've got the climate that we're dealing with.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and I think brook trout are going to be a climate loser. They're a cold water obligate stream fish species, and we may see rainbow trout lasting a little bit longer, and then they may too be climate losers. But you're absolutely right.
Thank you.
Seth, historically, were there brook trout above the barriers in the streams, or were they only in Lake Superior?
Yeah, there were. Cory may do a better job of answering that than me, so I'll punt that to him for his presentation. But my understanding was there were native brook trout populations in all of the North Shore streams, and I think one of the theories that the Minnesota DNR has used is that downstream flow of fish from those upstream populations really contributed to what we historically saw for coastal brook trout populations.
your feedback?
Yeah, I've got one question, Seth. It's Nick Peterson. So, you know, we talk about the interactions between the native and non-native. One of the key drivers, one of the key things that I tell anglers and other folks when it comes to managing a fall run fish, I mean, you hit the nail on the head right there, where it's the habitat for any fall run fish to begin with on our shoreline, including yours, is largely unsuitable for. It's an uphill battle to try to get any fall fish back, and so everything except for steelhead spawns in the fall on top of each other, and then they have to go through this winter period of, you know, this really poor habitat conditions, spring flood flows and all this stuff. So, I was just curious about your opinion on when you talk to some people from other areas of Lake Superior, like up in the Ontario area and stuff like that. They'll say that their populations of native and non-native fish right now are probably at some of the highest abundance they've ever been. And it's not just brook trout, but steelhead, and Chinooks, and cohos, and everything else. And then the other opinion is, you know, maybe those native and non-native fish occupy different niches within even the stream habitat where it's suitable to where they can coexist. And on top of that, you've got, you know, a spring spawning steelhead that's bringing in, or salmon or anything else that's bringing in these nutrients from Lake Superior into these very infertile streams that we do have. What kind of impact, is there a positive impact that they could have on brook trout, or do you think it's, you know, the overlap and competition at a young age is the driver?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, if you look at the literature, there are as many papers describing the presence of interspecific competition as there are papers saying it doesn't exist in these different habitats and different niches within so at this point, I think it's a wash. It's about equal. The way I think about it is extremely simplistic, and that is historically there was one native fish species using these streams, and now there are 6. And so it just stands to reason that in a nutrient limited system, there's going to be some level of competition for those nutrients.
And that's that whole dilemma there is something that, you know, I'm super interested in learning more about moving forward with our coastal work, and no Cory will talk about it all either, but that native non-native interaction, not only particularly in the low barrier sections where those are, but
yeah. The other thing that I think is interesting about the Canadian streams is, well, a couple things. You know, first of all, that entire country has a population less than the state of California, right? So they have a lot of streams and a lot of natural resources divided amongst a very low population density. That definitely helps them. Relative to coastal brook trout, they actually took the lead on coastal brook trout restoration, and they increased their regulations on the species at least 10 or 15 years before anybody else in the basin did. And they saw a response rate on those regulations where immediately after they imparted a 22-inch size limit, they saw high populations of brook trout cropped off at exactly 22 inches. I actually would commend the DNR, the Minnesota DNR. They were sort of next in line in the regulation game, and I think as a result of that, there's some pretty positive information that Cory should be able to share about increasing average sizes of coastal brook trout because of the regulation changes. So I do think leading early and aggressively is a helpful practice.
And one other question here. With the shoreline electrofishing assessments, so I've been with you guys and actually handled a 24-inch brook trout up in the Portage River with DJ last year, so it was fantastic. What's the bands, and is there a success point with stocking program
Yeah.
Do you have a number or something, or like, what's your relative success?
We do, and I'm not sure if we'll ever achieve it. When we first started stocking, we were challenged by the Fish and Wildlife Service, from whom we were getting eggs and fry and fingerlings, to develop a brook trout management plan. And we put a goal of 20 spawning pairs for each of 3 tributaries. And in my tenure in Grand Portage from 2005 to present, we've never seen anywhere near that. And that's where, at this point, 20 years of stocking down the road of just my career and 30 years in total, I'm not sure that we're going to ever get really strong, viable reproducing populations of coastal brook trout. Maybe if we change strains, maybe if we try a few different things, but it does seem like this is a long road and we've not had a great deal of reproductive success.
Yeah, any question? Anybody else? All right, well, that's a good segue, I think, then to Cory. Seth, are you able to stay with us? You're muted.
Sorry, I put myself on mute. Yeah, I'll stay and eavesdrop on Cory's presentation so I can throw darts at him the next time I see him at a bar.
I think I told you it'd take me a minute here. So I have to get back to the share screen. Find it. Make sure it gets to the full screen here. Okay, I think you are good to go.
Excellent. Seth, can you see that?
Yes, I can. Looks like you may not be in presenter view, but that's okay because it's the slides.
That's been the problem. It doesn't like to do presenters view. But I'm in here.
It is on the screen.
Yeah, on our screen it's presenters view, but yeah.
Gotcha. That's okay. I can see the slides. This is just fine.
That's something I have to, wait, what's up here? There you go, yeah. Presenter. Can you see
There
it
you
now?
go. Yep, that's great.
So now we get this,
Yeah,
that's not,
no, yeah, let's swap back.
yeah, we're gonna have
Seth
to,
can deal with it.
that's not, I don't know why.
Yeah, prioritize the in-person audience for sure.
Now that I'm here. I warned you. Get back up this way.
Hey, while you're doing that, I have a quick update. About 4:30 this afternoon, I had an article shared with me that the $1 billion environment bill did get passed by the governor.
Oh, okay.
One thing that didn't get passed was the ban on lead fishing tackle, but they at least threw some money at the Get the Lead Out campaign. I heard you talking about that earlier.
Yeah, now it won't let me go back. It's not letting me go back to that other view. I'm getting there. That's weird. It's the things we learn every time we do this. There you go.
That's okay. I want to see Cory do it in interpretive dance because his slides don't come up.
Can you see it now, or is it
No, I can't see anything now.
okay? What the heck is it doing?
You aren't sharing the screen yet.
Yeah. And then when I go to that, it won't let me get back to.
There we go. It's up now. This is great. This is great.
I gotta make it so we can see it right here. Come on. There.
Excellent.
All right.
So you're gonna get the funny screen. I will.
It's all good.
There we go. Okay.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having us here tonight. And if you can tell, Seth and I have known each other for about 24 years. I actually had to get out my calculator, Seth, to figure out how many years that was. So
It feels like a lifetime. It feels like a lifetime to me.
Seth and I went to undergraduate at Northern College together for overlap for a couple of years. So we've known each other for quite a long time.
That remote doesn't work, unfortunately.
This should be my own remote.
And it doesn't work with. This is a very old projector.
Okay, deal.
We've had no.
Okay, I'll just have you.
Yeah, sorry about that,
No problem.
I just tell you, it doesn't. Yeah.
So, as was mentioned in my bio, I grew up in the UP of Michigan, fishing all the time as much as I could. I don't even think feral describes what we were back then. I always say to my poor mom, I don't know how you survived. Me and my brother are only 2 years apart, so I don't know how she survived this. In my hometown of Fisheries, Michigan, John Bolter, also known as Robert Travers, or locally as the Judge, writer of the Anatomy of a Murder, Trout Madness, Black and White Fish, numerous fantastic books, a lot of them with a fishing centric viewpoint. My grandparents knew him well, a beloved local hero. So having him as kind of a backdrop to my childhood really propelled me into one, loving brook trout, and two, making a career of fisheries management. Next slide, please. I did my undergraduate at Northern College in Ashland, Wisconsin, and then went out to see the South at Tennessee Tech in between Nashville and Knoxville, working on a state listed endangered species down there, as well as a lot of reservoir work. And I've been in Duluth now for about 17 years or so. So in the email of the presentation, there were a few questions that I wanted to make sure that I addressed, so we're gonna get the boring one out of the way first. How federal, state, and tribal agencies work together in the Great Lakes. There's 2 treaties with Canada that really describe our intercollaborative work. And one is the Boundary Waters Treaty of 1909 that deals with water issues. That's where the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement side of things come from. And then the 1954 Convention of Great Lakes Fisheries. That was a treaty that established the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. In the mid-1950s, Lake Superior was just starting to see impacts of sea lamprey on its fish populations, particularly lake trout. At that point, in all the other Great Lakes, lake trout were wiped out. Not reduced, not at low numbers, but wiped out. Lake Superior was the only Great Lake to retain any wild lake trout. So to try to form a treaty or a way of collaborative management on the Great Lakes has been going on since the 1800s, but we could never, as a bunch of different states come together and hammer out seasonal closures, gear restrictions, who should be fishing when, what should we should be fishing, what we should be fishing for, no fishing for lake trout whitefish in November. Nobody could ever decide or come to agreement on that. It took the near collapse of the lake trout fishery due to sea lamprey for everybody to say, okay, we need a game plan here. One, we got to figure out how to kill sea lamprey, and that's how the Great Lakes Fishery Commission was formed. Next slide, please. So we still operate under the Great Lakes Fishery Commission through mainly the Joint Strategic Plan, which is all of the state, tribal, federal agencies involved with fisheries work are signatory to the Joint Strategic Plan. But then the framework of the Great Lakes Fishery Commission really centers around these lake committees. So each Great Lake has a lake committee made up of agency folks that are decision makers, policy folks, kind of the higher level folks that when they get the information in front of them, will make a decision collaboratively. Those are then supported by technical committees, which are the biologists, researchers, managers, the boots on the ground doing the work. The lake committee will task the tech committees with providing them with information. We are non-political, non-policy. We focus on the science, which separates us from the lake committee. So we focus on the science, we get them information, they make decisions. And that's not to say that decisions made in this forum dictate what each state agency does. That was one of the big sticking points of previous collaborative efforts was the states wanted to retain states' rights. They didn't want to hand management control over to the federal government. The next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the Joint Strategic Plan is really the overarching plan for the Great Lakes and all of the agencies on how we work within the framework of the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. Each of the lakes then has fish community objectives or goals and objectives for each species that are explicitly or pie in the sky sometimes described as kind of a higher level objective. How we should be working on brook trout, lake sturgeon, lake wide. So you go from Great Lakes total down to a specific lake, and then here in Minnesota, we operate under a fisheries management plan, 10-year plan. The last one was revised in 2015, so it goes from 2015 to 2025, so we'll be starting that process unbelievably here in a short year or so. So really what the other two previous plans do is really put sidebars on what management we do in Minnesota water. So overarching Great Lakes plans, overarching Lake Superior plans, you know, we're not gonna stop bull sharks in Lake Superior because we told our collaborators across the lakes, we're gonna operate in this fashion. It doesn't tell us what we can do, but it helps us put sidebars on the management actions we want to take. Next question, much more exciting than that stuff. The feasibility of a quick grow take stocking program to replace nearshore cannabis fishery. I gotta take a seat in my office is bugging me because we've talked about this for quite a few years now of stocking a brook trout strain that would provide that nearshore fishing component. If you're not familiar with the cannabis program, it was a strain, domesticated strain of rainbow trout that was domesticated in the hatchery, so no wild genetics. That we had stocked into Lake Superior as purely for a harvest component since we moved to a catch and release only fishery for steelhead in 1996. So we did some genetic work, Nick doing the steelhead genetics project, working with a lot of different anglers, getting samples ourselves. Essentially, we found integration everywhere we looked, low levels, but we found it everywhere we looked. So that boosted us into, well, we have to genetically screen every steelhead we use in our hatchery program. We know we can produce pure strain steelhead. Let's just move to that. So we switched strains. We still put the fin on for harvest. So that's how we kind of moved into our new phase of steelhead stocking in Lake Superior. Brook trout is one that we have always tossed around as it would be a great replacement for that lost nearshore opportunity that Kamloops provided. One of the difficulties that we have now, as Seth had mentioned previously, is really the only strain that's available is a shoal spawning strain. And if we're talking about rehabilitation of brook trout in Minnesota waters, we want to see a stream spawning strain, right? In the fall, we want to see those fish coming back to our rivers so anglers can harvest them. It would be a harvest centric stocking program, but it would also be countered as a rehabilitation program as well. All right, some history. I'm a history buff. I love all the old history stuff we have in our office. So historical angling accounts. This is the Superior Chronicle, 1858. Seth had mentioned that brook trout are fairly easy to catch, and that's true. As you can see here, the land officers at Buchanan or on Knife River have enjoyed this great luxury for some time. During our visit to that place several days ago, we were informed that one gentleman had taken from Knife River 200 nice trout in a short time. And those are the brook trout. And we see that repeated in numerous articles from this time period. The French River, all the way up the shore, folks would take Mackinac skip trips out of Duluth up the shore, and it's 100, 200, 300 brook trout near the mouths of the rivers or in the rivers, some approaching 2.5 plus 3 pounds. So a lot of brook trout back then, a lot of good sized brook trout, but a lot of harvest was taking place even before there were roads up the shore. So historical brook trout stocking, we think, you know, only in recent times have there been stocking of brook trout going on, but this is the article from, I don't have the newspaper that was from. Oh, it was Fishburne Gate is what this was from. So this is the Superintendent Wires, which is this would be the person in charge of the Lester River Federal Fish Hatchery. That was built in 1888 as a whitefish hatchery. They also did brook trout, they did Cisco, they did a bunch of other things out of that hatchery. This one's, they're talking about 100,000 brook trout from the Northville hatchery being stocked on Isle Royal, Wisconsin, and in Minnesota waters. So even back in the late 1800s, brook trout were going everywhere, whitefish were going everywhere. There was a lot of fish movement from a lot of different places, not only in Minnesota, but around the Great Lakes. Historical habitat degradation, Seth touched on this a bit, but I really think these two critical events are why we are seeing a lack of rehabilitation for brook trout. In recent times, first off, the clear cutting of the old growth forests along the north shore. And subsequent habitat damage that caused in the streams, and then after that, you have the forest fires that came through, burned up all the slash, really denuded the landscape. I mean, there's there's not a lot of shade trees there for our rivers. So next slide, please. Thaddeus Server was a biologist for the Department of Conservation back in the early 1920s. And he was the first biologist to do a survey on the North Shore in Minnesota, and that occurred 1918 through about 1921. And this was in his report. I hate reading a bunch of stuff, but this is so good, and it makes the point so clear that I have to read it. He's talking about the relationship between logging and fires here. He says, because of changed conditions brought about by the deforestation of great areas of this region, some of the once famous brook trout streams are no longer tenable as such, and will have to be restocked with brown trout or other species more suitable for the changed conditions. These radical changes that have come within the past 35 years, occasioned in the first place by lumbering operations and followed later by forest fires, which destroyed immense areas of swampland, along with second growth in the slashings, giving the powerful rays of the sun access to the cold sphagnum swamps. Fires have actually destroyed many of these sphagnum swamps. This rise in water temperature has been so marked as to prohibit the presence of brook trout in certain parts of the streams during long periods in the summer. The colder upper water have been destroyed, so that trout in their search for cold waters have been compelled to descend many of the streams to Lake Superior. He then goes on to talk about the summer influx of tourists when roads were in better shape. The influx of summer tourists, I think I did that, sorry. The influx of summer tourists and trout anglers along the North Shore, which is made more accessible by good roads, has caused a tremendous drain on the trout streams. And the problem of maintaining the fishing in these streams now assumes great importance, and was one of the problems confronting us when this survey was undertaken. The planting of brown trout or smallmouth bass in unduly heated streams, thereby diverting greater number of brook trout to streams still suited to their habitat, is apparently about the only solution to this problem. So even in 1922, habitat issues, warm water issues, stock brown trout, stock smallmouth bass, that type of thing. Luckily for us, the resilience of the landscape has shown itself over the past 100 years, and many of the rivers that Thaddeus Server was surveying now harbor brook trout populations. So that's a good news story. Next slide.
I see it.
Okay, let's see.
There you go.
Yes. So we talk about changing landscape, we talk about the deforestation of the old growth forest, that secondary growth comes in as primarily aspen and food for beavers. Here's looking at an aerial photo from 1939 of the Knife River, Clover Valley area. See, there's not a lot of beaver dams here, one right here, and here's one in 2009. You can see beaver dam after beaver dam after beaver dam after beaver dam, all the way up in these. These are our cold, spring-fed headwater streams, and we really don't have water on the North Shore. So every time, if even one of these beaver dams warms that water by 1 degree, you're looking at a stretch of 10 to 12 beaver dams in a row, and each of those consecutively warming water flows. Next slide, please. Oh, by the end of the presentation, I'll remember. So some of these changes seem more permanent when we talk about beaver dams as well. Here's 1991. You can see beaver dam, beaver dam, beaver dam, beaver dam, right? And you can see in 2021 that those open areas that were once beaver ponds are now the same landscape as it was. So after those beaver ponds were gone and the river kind of formed itself again, that grassland area didn't come back in large conifers or shade trees. It stayed as wide open grasslands. A lot of it made up of invasive grasses. So that's something that's always been of interest to me, is how can we reclaim these riparian areas around old beaver dams and help those cold water habitats maintain themselves. Because that's the secondary part of the beaver issue, is that transition away from old growth conifers to aspens took your beaver population from very low numbers to numbers that skyrocketed compared to what they were historically. Here are some of the stream temperature stuff, from looking at beaver dams, above beaver dams and below beaver dams. This is, the little east branch of the Knife River up off of, I remember the name, up off of Airport Road that way. So north of Two Harbors. Nope. I'll think of it. Anyway, so this is a temperature logger above the beaver dam. So no beaver impoundment. You can see that water temperature is 50, 55, maybe 60 degrees throughout the summer months. So this is June 1 to the end of September. This is water temperature. And you can see, and the blue here is the range of growth. So the water temperatures where brook trout will grow. The yellow is the range of stress. So those time periods that are stressful for brook trout. And the orange is the lethal range. And this is only average temperature too. So this is, those temperature loggers are recording a temperature every hour. And this is the average of those. So it's not the maximum that we saw in the day, it's the average. So these temperatures over here are actually higher if you're looking at maximum temperature. And what you see below beaver dams on this end is you see throughout the summer, long stretches of those water temperatures being within that range of thermal stress for brook trout, and even hitting that lethal temperature range. And what we see is when you, especially when you maintain long time periods, and this is like, you know, you're approaching end of June all the way through August, middle of August. When you maintain those temperatures that long in a stressful period, that's essentially lethal for brook trout. They can't handle those long periods of stressful. They might be able to handle peaks into those temperatures, but not for that stretch of time. So talking about fishery management and how we manage for brook trout and coastal brook trout. Going back to our fisheries management plan, our 10-year plan, we have a chapter on brook trout. The overall goal, protect and maintain self-sustaining coastal brook trout stocks in Minnesota waters, Lake Superior or practical. Then we have these objectives: manage for a trophy brook trout fishery, protect, rehabilitate, restore habitat, support research on coastal brook trout, work cooperatively with Grand Portage Bank, looking at brook trout stocking strategies, and investigate the feasibility of adopting our Lake Superior Technical Committee's shoreline electrofishing protocol. So these were all objectives that were developed in this last management plan revision process in 2015. So looking at objective 1, manage for a trophy brook trout fishery below barriers. As Seth mentioned earlier, in 2006, Minnesota DNR changed the below barrier regulation for brook trout to a 1 fish over 20 inches. So if it's a below barrier reaching stream and angler catches a brook trout, it's got to be 20 inches, and you can only keep one of them. In 2014, we did above barrier regulation change that shifted the bag limit. So how many brook trout anglers can keep, shifted it from 10 fish down to 5 fish. So we have the below barrier reach, 1 fish greater than 20 inches, the above barrier reaches dropping down to a 5 bag limit or possession limit. Objective 2, protect, rehabilitate, restore habitat on high priority streams. This is a slide from Dean Perone up in the Finlandary office, highlighting some of the culvert replacement work he has been doing in the Hockaming Creek watershed, which is a sub-watershed of the Baptism River. In 2015, historically below average brook trout populations for the amount of habitat that was available. 7 culverts had acted as fish barriers, limiting access to cold water. So in these lower reaches where there's a barrier, these lower reaches where there's barriers preventing brook trout from accessing those cold water reaches where most of their spawning takes place, most of the juvenile rearing takes place, you're losing all of this rearing habitat just because of a perched culvert. After 2022, when all of the culvert replacement work will be done, Hockaming Creek will be restored to 95% connectivity within that subwatershed. So brook trout will have access to the vast majority of Hockaming Creek in the cold water habitats. Only 1 culvert remaining acting as a fish barrier, and I believe it was maybe this one on a higher or a different tributary to Hockaming Creek. And this effort was a collaborative effort through Minnesota DNR, Lake County, Southern Water Conservation District, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and Trout Unlimited, with a lot of the funding coming through the EPA on the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement side of the house. Objective 3, coordinate with other agencies and support research on coastal brook trout. This is some of the work that we've been doing with the Coaster Genetics Project, where we go out, we sample similar to the Steelhead Genetics Project. We go sample streams, collect genetic samples from the fish that we collect here. We're backpack electrical fishing. They can tell me what river that is. Onion River. So we can collect fish with our backpack electrical fishing units that the water is knee high, maybe even hip high, unless you're short like me. But we really struggle to catch brook trout in these deep pools at the base of waterfalls. So what we've been doing, and Nick's been working with anglers on this a lot, is coordinating with anglers, signing them up for the Coaster Genetics Project, getting them a packet of information, packet of scale envelopes, and relying on anglers fishing those deep water pools that we can't access with our sampling gear, relying on anglers to collect us samples of brook trout from those deep pools. And what Nick's seen in that work is that anglers actually are catching larger, on average, brook trout in these deeper pools than we can sample with our gear. So it's a great way for us to get additional samples for free in habitats that we can't sample on our own. Another genetics effort that we've been working on, this is effort with the first, I'll call it version 1.0 of our Coaster Genetics Project. This was sort of our pilot project looking at above barrier, below barrier, and inlet populations of brook trout, the genetics of those, and how they're related. As was mentioned earlier, our North Shore streams in the fall are not good places to spawn. They're even worse places to rear if you happen to hatch. So what we've always kind of hypothesized is that because brook trout are fall spawners and that habitat is so poor that there's very limited reproduction occurring below barriers. That means the brook trout that we're seeing below barriers and in Lake Superior are from populations that are actually above barriers, acting as source populations for Lake Superior. So this was the version 1.0 of the Coaster Genetics Project, where we sampled these rivers. Michigan State University, Nadia Muzadeh has done some single nucleotide polymorphism genetic analysis, so super high resolution genetic analysis on these samples. And what they found is that there are well differentiated above barrier populations that supply brook trout to the below barrier reaches. So each of these rivers has its genetically distinct brook trout populations above the barriers. Some rivers have brook trout from multiple populations in below barrier reaches, but admixing is limited, meaning in some of these below barrier reaches, genetically, we saw fish from that river above barrier, and we also saw fish from other rivers, meaning that we kind of got a mixed population when we were sampling there. But that admix component is, we're not seeing reproduction between, we're just seeing individual fish in those reaches. Brook trout sampled from Lake Superior were from multiple riverine source populations, so we were able, in this version 1.0, we sampled up in Grand Marais, got a good sample of brook trout and got genetic samples from those, and they were able to genetically identify those as populations from these various rivers, not a distinct Lake Superior spawning population. And again, wild populations showed no sign of interbreeding with stock brook trout. That was kind of one of our last objectives, was to look to see whether or not we're seeing any sort of inbreeding with the shoal spawning Isle Royal string with our river spawning brook trout population, because all the work that we've done genetically since the mid-90s has shown that each of our rivers are genetically distinct brook trout populations, and they should be managed as such. So Coaster Genetics Project version 2.0, this was recently funded, $30,000 from the EPA on the Great Lakes Water Quality Review inside the house, $100,000 investment from Minnesota DNR to just analyze additional genetic samples. $30,000 goes from the EPA to collect genetic samples above barriers. Well over 1,000 genetic samples collected. We hit above barrier populations, below barrier populations, and inlet populations, so expanded our range of sampling. We want to identify watersheds that produce coastal brook trout. and identify cold water and climate change resilience strategies based on where those fish are coming from. So that work is ongoing, analysis is ongoing, and hopefully we get some, by summer, we should get some genetic results. Goals 4 and 5, I'm gonna combine these two, work with Grand Portage Band to monitor stopping and investigate the feasibility of Minnesota DNR adopting the Lake Superior Tech Committee protocols, which is that shoreline electrofishing survey that Seth had talked about. So this is our first, we've done it 3 years so far. This is really our first attempt at this shoreline electrofishing on North Shore in Minnesota waters outside of the Grand Portage zone. Here's Nipigon Bay, Ontario, so kind of a good reference area that you can frame your mind around, good brook trout populations. Tobin Harbor on Isle Royal, another really good brook trout population. Here's data from the Grand Portage zone by Seth. And you look at our Grand Marais, Minnesota numbers here. This is fish per kilometer. So however many fish you collected in a kilometer of electrofishing along the shoreline. And you can see our Grand Marais numbers, they're very close to what's seen in Nipigon Bay and Tobin Harbor, Isle Royal. So really good populations in that Grand Marais area of coastal brook trout. We also sample Taconite Harbor, so these are years, 2015, 2016, 17, 18, 19. COVID threw a work in everybody's sampling plans. Last 2021, we were able to do Taconite Harbor. Again, 5 brook trout per kilometer, which, you know, rivals Tobin Harbor and Nipigon Bay. So seeing good numbers out of Taconite Harbor and Silver Bay, and I didn't include 2 harbors on here because we really only got like 1 or 2 fish in both Silver Bay and 2 harbors. Investigate the feasibility of us adopting these protocols. The issue that we have with shoreline electrofishing for tracking abundance is we only caught 90 brook trout in 2021, which was our highest number that we've ever caught. What we're trying to do is evaluate the ongoing regulation of 1 fish over 20, and also to track abundance of spawning populations in Minnesota tributaries. So we've always relied on our fall spawning survey, where we throw crews together with backpack electrofishing gear, and we sample tributaries along the North Shore from mid-October through mid-November if we can get out there. And we've been doing this since 1997. So since that initial 1 fish over 20 inches regulation was instituted, we've been doing this survey. You can see through time, these numbers continuing to decline in our brook trout survey in the rivers. So they're spawning populations that we know are in that river specifically to spawn. The shoreline electrofishing, we don't know if the fish that we catch there is living in that area, spawning in that area, or if it's just a transient fish we're seeing from Canada or Grand Portage or somewhere else, because we do know these fish can move long distances in short periods of time. So for us to see this increase in numbers is really good. Right around 2018, I think, is when we changed how we sample. So we had been sampling 25 tributaries all the way from the lower shore up to the top of the North Shore. 2018 or so, maybe 2018, we reevaluated where we were sampling because we looked at our catch data and said, there's 12 rivers on here where we've only ever caught 1 brook trout or 0 brook trout. If we're really interested in rehabilitation, we need to focus on where we know we can catch good numbers of brook trout to track those populations. That doesn't mean we're ignoring the other ones. We can go back there any other year or in subsequent years. We just want to really focus on these top 12 high priority brook trout streams. So that's what we've been doing the last few go rounds. Originally, this survey was set up to go every 5 years. In this last management plan, we said we need to do better than that. We want to try to do 3 years. It'd be great to do every year, but let's get to 3 years first, and then maybe we can see if we can get 2 years and then 1 year. Because I think a lot of what we see with brook trout populations is sometimes we're just not looking in the right places. Right? I think that's what we found out with our electrofishing, shoreline electrofishing surveys is these populations were always there, we just had to go. This is that fall spawning survey again, looking at this is length group, so 0 inches to 5, 5 to 8, 8 to 12, 12 to 16, 16 to 20, and 20 plus. What we do see, as Seth had mentioned, with that 1 over 20 inch regulation below barriers, we do see a shift and more brook trout getting to that larger size range. Not a lot, right? I mean, we're still, looks like 1 or 2 fish over 20 inches there, but we're seeing this shift in larger fish in this survey, which is good to see. But that doesn't mean, right, I always throw this back at everybody, just because it's a 10-inch fish in Lake Superior doesn't mean it's not a coastal brook trout. Our definition of good coastal brook trout is any brook trout that spends any portion of its life in Lake Superior. So that beautiful little green 10-inch brook trout that you saw somebody holding, that was from Graham Ray, that's a coastal brook trout. It doesn't have to be 20+ inches to be a coaster. Some other work we've got going on, roadmaps to resilience is something that Dave Zender was involved with this 10, 12 years ago in kind of the infancy stage of it. But it was, how do we effectively scale evaluations addressing beneficial use impairments, ecological function of watersheds, ecosystem services in areas, and do it in a prioritized fashion, right? In some of these watersheds, there's a whole lot of work that we can do all over the place, and we do that, but how can we do it in a more coordinated fashion that gets the most bang for the buck and gets us the most return from that resource, right? This is work that John Lehman's been doing in Tisher and Buckingham Creek. Focus, again, getting funding from the EPA, Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement side of the house. Tisher Creek has existing brook trout populations, Buckingham Creek has existing brook trout populations. And the focus of this from a DNR fisheries perspective really is climate change resilience, cold water protection strategies. So looking at restoration of cold water refugia for brook trout, because one thing we have right out the door here is a dam, right, in the middle of a trout stream. So it acts just like a beaver dam would. Impounds water, spreads it out across the landscape, heats up the water below that dam, comes warm water. And we have spawning populations just around the corner here. So how do we one, maybe preserve the dam feature that folks like, and 2, restore cold water habitat for spawning brook trout. Buckingham Creek is another interesting one, restoration of natural stream ponds through existing inline ponds on golf courses, daylighting some piped reaches or reaches that have been buried underground in culverts, and removal of those culverts that are acting as barriers, and long-term preservation of land in those cold water inputs in the headwater areas. Other work that we're looking for funding is identifying cold water seeps and springs on the North Shore. Again, Thaddeus Server back in 1922 did the original stream tributary survey on the North Shore, where he did identify seeps and springs. This is an old canvas map where he identified where these seeps and springs were back in 1922. 100 years later, it'd be great to go back and identify where those seeps and springs are occurring, if they still occur where they originally did, if we have other ones that have popped up due to stream meanderings. And really the goal of this would be to identify those seeps and springs, those cold water inputs, and figure out ways to protect them for the long term. Because when we look at climate change, you look at thermal habitat, that really is the most important thing for brook trout, is that cold water resource. And so how do we protect that for long term? Here's a picture of me in my younger days with working with Duluth, looking at a spring pool. So here's a spring pool in a Knife River watershed in the headwaters of McCarthy Creek. This is what it looked like over winter. This is an area that had been clear cut over because this spring and this spring run was not identified on any map. So to identify these springs and seeps, put them into protection or figure out ways to protect it is an ultimate goal for us for that cold water preservation. And finally, limitations to rehabilitation according to Cory. One is that habitat, thermal, number one. Thermal habitat is number one limiter, in my opinion. Physical habitat is number 2 limiter. Below barrier habitat on the North Shore, summer and fall can have very low water, very warm water. If we see years like this where we have a lot of northeast winds, that'll pile up gravel bars in front of our river mouths. Snow coaster brook trout are getting in there to spawn. Waterfall barriers immediately above Lake Superior. Very short sections of stream for these things to spawn and reproduce and grow to be, juvenile or older brook trout that then go to Lake Superior. Predation. this was taken out of Holden by an angler I know quite well, a lake trout that he jigged up that had about a 14-inch brook trout in its belly. So we've done a great job collaboratively across Lake Superior for the last 65 years, rehabilitating lake trout population from, almost annihilation from sea lamp rate. So we think we've hit peak abundance for lake trout, but it seems like every year we keep exceeding it. So we're not quite there yet even, but that rehabilitated lake trout population is always hungry. And silvery fish in Lake Superior is getting chased by a whole lot of lake trout. And in some instances, that may include some of our brook trout. And harvest, Seth touched on that a little bit. Brook trout are notoriously easy to catch. We've seen that from our historical harvest records. Luckily, with the 1/20-inch bag limit, that's a really good regulation to keep harvest at a minimum. And also, angling groups have done an incredible job educating anglers on the importance of catch and release fishing, right? As an agency, we're always pushed to make it catch and release only for everything. I always say our perspective as an agency is to provide as many angling opportunities to as many anglers as possible, whether that's harvest, catch and release, trophy fishing, whatever it is. Our job is to provide the opportunity. It's advocacy groups like Trout Unlimited, Steelhead Association, like Minnesota Steelhead, to advocate and educate anglers on the importance of catch and release fishing. So DNR side, we want to make sure there's opportunities for all kinds of anglers. On the advocacy side, do a fantastic job of advocating catch and release. Hopefully, number 4, our knowledge. Even all of the work that we've done since 1997, our knowledge of these fish is, in my opinion, very limited. We don't know really how much habitat use in different parts of Lake Superior they have. We don't know what they do seasonally. We don't know how much time they spend in the rivers below barriers. There's very little information that we really know about these fish. And it's our hope in subsequent years here, again, with dropping from 5 years to 3 years, hopefully we can get that down to 1 or 2 years and really start getting a better understanding of what these fish do, how they move, what they eat, how far they travel to better manage the species. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
When you electrofish on Lake Superior, are you right up against the shore?
Right on.
And do you find any particular habitat along the shore that tends to hold the trout, or is it just you?
Those I don't want to say too much and give it away, but the marina areas, the shallow sheltered bay areas, like Grand Marais Marina is those are good. My harbors, natural bay areas.
With the shallow sheltered area?
Shallow sheltered areas that have cobble habitats seem to be a place that hold brook trout.
And if it's bedrock, there's nothing.
Yep. And there's a whole lot of bedrock.
Like no other species.
Right.
So this is a question from someone who doesn't fish generally. When you stock coastal brook trout, where do you stock them? And I'm kind of thinking of Seth's point about maybe the Lake Superior population really.
Yep. Great question, and I should have mentioned this at the beginning. All of this information is wild natural brook trout populations. We don't stock any brook trout, right? We do stock steelhead, but in this last management plan revision, we did shift how we stock steelhead. We no longer stock steelhead fry or those newly hatched steelhead. We don't stock those above barriers anymore. We've been doing that for 30 plus years. And we wanted to evaluate how that stocking program was, whether that fry stocking program contributed to any angler catch rates. So we said, okay, the only really way to do that is to stop stocking fry, monitor harvest or monitor catch rates through the creel survey and see what happens to these spawning populations. Secondly, what that does is it gives us an idea of those above barrier populations, whether or not we're going to see brook trout inhabit those areas that were once occupied by steelhead, but now are not. And, it kind of gets into that resource competition is if we remove steelhead from the system and brook trout don't show up, then what's the problem? My guess would be temperature in some of these lower reaches of our above barrier sections. You can get rid of steelhead, but water temperatures still prohibit brook trout from being there probably from June through October. So it's really a the thermal habitat, I think, is a critical component for where brook trout are located.
So you like history. I was thinking historically, before the logging era was here, we had the fur trapping era. And fur bearers, especially beaver, were greatly reduced in Minnesota. Then at the same time, in the 1800s, we were kind of at the end of the little ice age, where they had unusually cold weather. I wonder if the combination of those two things helped all the old forests in Minnesota, like ideal conditions.
Oh, for sure, absolutely. I mean, you know, you read some of the old Jesuit priests' accounts of North Shore tributaries, and they were talking about having a hard time getting a canoe up the river because it was so choked with cedar. Right? So I mean, you think about that historic habitat where choked with cedars, the entire stream was shaded. So cold water from the headwaters can make it all the way down the mouth regardless how long that river was. It was completely shaded. Right? So then you remove those old growth conifer forests, open up the canopy, allow that water temperature to warm up. Not to mention what happens to the rivers when you remove all of the trees. The erosion that occurs just from removing trees along the river is incredible. So you shift all that spawning habitat goes away. I mean, we've seen it happen with grayling in Michigan, brook trout pretty much all over the place is thermal habitat and then the physical habitat degradation from just those streams constantly shifting is, you know, a real issue for any spawning brook trout populations. Dave?
Cory, so the people management of all our activities is our greatest challenge. And cases, building understanding with our clients is such a difficult thing to do. And I often think of Wisconsin rule. You know, there's what, maybe 200 or 300 Chinook come up that system, maybe 3,000 migratory wild trout, maybe 5,000 to 7,000 steelhead. Yep. And what, maybe a couple thousand silver salmon coho. And it all gets into this system. And there we have a group of rural enforcement doing beaver control. Now we come back over to night and have all kinds of beaver control, talking about animals, etc. And you know, it just seems like it's so difficult to get focus stretch a little bit and understand. Techniques are different. But they're right for the knife perhaps, but they're right for the rule. Then all the time, that's kind of a speech, not a question.
We completely understand where you're coming from, right? I mean, that's really what we deal with every day is trying to educate folks on why we do what we do. And a lot of what I tell people now is number one, Lake Superior is not a salmon lake. It's barely a good lake trout lake. It's a really good citrus. Citrus, the fat form of lake trout, live in 400 feet in deeper water. Lake Superior is a great citrus wet lake because that's the majority of habitat. Vast majority, I think it's over 80% of Lake Superior is greater than 400 feet. That's just what habitat. That's what we have. We can't change that. And then that's especially getting to the, well, why don't you stock salmon or why don't you stock this? And it's nice to see what we've seen on Lake Superior in particular is a shift away from kind of mass stocking events across the spectrum, right? Stocking millions of fish at a time and seeing what happens to really what we now call boutique fisheries. So like our steelhead program is considered a boutique fishery where we only stock 120,000 steelhead, juvenile steelhead in the French and the Lesser River. So it's a very localized fishery. We're only stocking 2 rivers. And the same thing with Wisconsin browns. You're stocking, you know, brown trout in a very specific area for angler harvest. So it's kind of that component of saying we've come to the realization that certain things work in certain areas, right? And the other part of it is, especially when we talk about the North Shore, I always say within Lake Superior, the North Shore is the South Shore. The South Shore is not the Apostle Islands, and none of those are Lake Michigan. very different habitats, I mean, they're nowhere near the same, even within Lake Superior. And then folks always say, well, we should have salmon like Lake Michigan, right? Our record Chinook salmon a few years ago out of the Silver Bay Salmon Classic was 3 pounds at that point. We're cold, we're deep, we're unproductive, we don't have a lot of alewife, we're a lake trout. So more that we kind of keep day after day, and sometimes I'll honestly sit on the phone with somebody that's mad that we don't stock Chinooks. I'll have an hour and a half long conversation with them, talk about the history of sea lamprey predation on lake trout, wiping out the top native predator, making room for rainbow smelt. Smelt populations explode in the 60s and 70s. We stocked a bunch of salmon. Smelt populations die off. Salmon populations were booming because of all the smelt. We rehabilitate lake trout, suppress the smelt. Everything else goes down with it. We have high populations of lake trout, low populations of everything else. We're more, in my opinion, more in a natural state on Lake Superior now than probably in the last 150 years.
I'd say this is a former Northern college, but you're not doing bad stuff.
Hey, Sam, appreciate it.
So on a lot of these small North Shore watersheds, it looks, I mean, it seems to me that you really got to target the prime ones. Because you've got this balance between water storage and watersheds, which beavers help. And temperatures that are at near the upper end.
Yep.
And so, to me, that kind of says bigger watersheds with the most groundwater input and some beavers.
Right.
To hold that water. Is that doable? I mean, that's a tall order.
Right. I mean, anything's doable, right? I mean, I think, again, going back to habitat, I think cold water habitat is the #1 variable. Like even if it's a small single thread stream, and it's got cold water, we'll see brook trout. So, you know, and it's the one thing about, you know, all of this stuff is folks are very passionate about everything, right? Which is great. We have great anglers that are passionate about angling. We have great conservationists that are passionate about beaver and you know, beaver removal strategies. And once we couch it to, well, if we can look at the big picture and realize that we need to start transforming our watersheds back to long-lived conifers away from aspen regen, those beaver numbers will drop by themselves, right?
Yeah.
If you ever have a free hour run up to the French River office, walk up our access road back to our little reservoir pool that we have for the hatchery, and walk the hillside there. Huge cedar trees, huge white pines, and you can get an idea of what the understory was when we had old growth forest on the North Shore. Middle of the summer, there's hardly any green underneath that canopy. No food for beavers, very low, we talk historically, low deer densities, low beaver densities, because there was hardly an understory, there was no food for it. So then again, you shift that away from that, hardly anything in the understory to aspen regen is all, it's all beaver, right? That's how you see these populations expand and build and get to the issues that we're having today. So once we kind of couch it in that frame of like, this is a solvable problem, right? Folks are upset that we have to do beaver removal if we want to maintain cold water resources. But if we need to look at the bigger picture from a landscape level, and if we're really, that's why we're really looking at the above barrier, below barrier, and inlet populations is if in fact our upstream brook trout populations are providing brook trout that turn into 22-inch coastal brook trout in Lake Superior, we need to turn our eyes away from the lake and focus on our watersheds. Right? So that's where our strategy needs to be if in fact in this next round of genetic analysis that's what it's telling us. We really have to refocus on watersheds.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Cory, on that. And that's, I mean, in an ideal world, if we truly wanted to restore coastal brook trout, every single stream would be cedar choked to the point that a person could not walk nor paddle through it. I mean, that is ideal brook trout habitat. And some of those Ontario streams still look like that.
I have a question.
I will try to.
Yeah. Seth, so do you have any feel to what degree the Ontario bays and rivers are a source to your area?
Oh, I see. I think there may be a little bit of emigration up by Pigeon Bay towards our area, but I don't think it's extensive. I mean, just the sheer number of clipped fish that we see relative to unclipped tells me there's not a lot of immigration of naturally reproduced fish coming in. What we're seeing is put, grow, take, or just put and grow.
That kind of reiterate that in Minnesota waters, we've been looking for the same thing.
Yeah.
So, Seth fish coming into our waters, but partly I don't, for the 20-inch minimum grade too, is if Grand Portage is stocking right above us. Clip or unclip, being able to evaluate whether or not those fish are interbreeding, within our populations. But the vast majority, I think we have 400 coaster samples that anglers have provided me over the last 5 years. Some really nice ones, and I was really interested in knowing, particularly the bigger fish, like the squake on the last slide Cory had, believe it or not, was a squake. They, whether or not those are squake or a stock hatchery fish or something else, they're getting these bigger sizes and they're not. So these 20-inch plus brook trout that I'm catching in Minnesota came from Minnesota. It was pretty cool to see the past present.
Yeah, I agree. Cory's predecessor, Don Schreiner, used to get mad at us in Portage for stocking so many fish because he was convinced we were polluting the Minnesota genome with our Tobin Harbor fish. And I think Don and even Cory did some genetic stuff, and it just doesn't look like there's that high of a stray rate or any reproductive success of the fish that are being stocked.
The stocked fish, I find your stocked fish, Seth, in 2 of the rivers that are the closest to the border of your waters, and that's about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
I thought when Seth talked, you said there was a correlation between grassy areas and brook trout habitat. Was that a negative correlation?
That was a negative correlation. Good question. Good question. So they were related, but in a negative fashion. Yeah, no, I thought Cory did a great job sort of describing historic habitats versus present day, and beaver systems warming these streams to the point that they're above the lethal thermal limits for brook trout. And I think we are in agreement that it needs to be landscape scale restoration if we ever want to have a hope of keeping these streams cool enough and packed enough with large woody debris to be useful for brook trout.
Well, I think that's probably a great note to end on, landscape scale restoration. Before we wrap up, Nick, I know you wanted to plug your cards for your program.
Oh, those little
Coming
cards,
back.
yeah, so we've got, for the fishermen and women in here, we've got a fishing report system. So we post a fishing report weekly, summer fishing report, smelt reports in spring, and spring stream conditions. We've got a new system now. You can take the card from back there. It's got a little QR code or it's got the web address on there. Go in there, you can put your email address in there and subscribe to it. And you'll automatically get an update on your phone when you post it. So you don't have to go look for it, it's just gonna come to you. So I just want to tell your friends. Less calls coming to me asking me.
So I want to thank all 3 of you for just a really interesting and informative presentation. We have not had any participants online. I'm wondering if something might be wrong with our link, but we have recorded the program. So if you hear from anyone that they missed it or they couldn't get in, we'll post that so that it can be watched by others. But I'd like to give you all a thank you so much for being here, and I think there's still cookies and lemonade in the back of the room. Pick up your fishing tackle, pick up your fishing cards and, great fishing season, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you.